I know Todd's hands are tied when it comes to Red Hood and his accessories, but what the hell is this? Everyone, just letting you know that all figures found in this review could be found over at bigbadtoystore.com. Links could be found in the description below, and if you guys use them, they help out the channel quite a bit. Earlier this year, Scarecrow wasn't the only figure that McFarlane Toys was pulling out of Arkham Knight to make a figure out of. In fact, it's not even from the main game, it's from the DLC specifically. We technically already got our Arkham Knight figure, and I actually did do a review on that particular rendition on the channel, so you guys can go check it out. Do it after this video, of course. But McFarlane decided to make a bold move as a companion piece to that Scarecrow and release the Red Hood. Full spoilers. I'm sorry, if you have not played Arkham Knight by this point, I don't understand why you're even checking out the channel since it's all Batman all the time here. But in Batman Arkham Knight, we get what is ultimately a lot of people's most disappointing reveal that the Arkham Knight was in fact Jason Todd, aka the Red Hood, the entire time. And Rocksteady decided to release a subsequent DLC where he decides to embrace the Red Hood persona, and this is pretty much his attire. An attire that I thought was pretty well done considering the slightly more grounded tone and atmosphere that Arkham Knight was going for over its predecessors. So the design as far as the actual jacket, the armoring underneath, that kind of blends in his own makeshift kind of style while at the same time retaining a little bit of that militarism that he had as the Arkham Knight when he was pretty much heading up the militia, pretty much makes sense. And McFarlane's take here is for the most part pretty faithful. I would see that there's a couple of things here and there that are a little bit mispainted, kind of similar to how I mentioned in the Scarecrow review, which I know I mentioned after the fact was all black, and he has typically a much more brown palette in there, so there was a little bit of misgivings there. Even though there was a gold label for that particular Scarecrow that was a bit more faithful and accurate, I understand that. Now, after having checked out some of the comments and such. With Red Hood, there was a gold label, however, he was completely all red, so this is the default version. The default version overall looks pretty cool, except for, like I said, a couple of paints here and there that just to me look kind of okay. To me, out of all of those parts would have to be the pants. The cargo militarized pants here with the very emphatic shin and knee guards here. I understand that they are on the character's design that Rocksteady provided, but at the same time, there's just something about them that just look kind of cheapy to me. So McFarlane can only kind of work with what they had, and overall they feel pretty good in hand. I just feel like this is definitely something that a customizer would probably have a field day with as far as touch-ups is concerned to make sure that this thing really stands out, because overall the paint decals on those shin guards as well as the cargo pants, the khaki pants right here, and the straps and the magazine clips kind of holstered onto the sides of his thighs, they're pretty standard and they're nothing to write home about. There's nothing all that great, but at the same time they're not necessarily terrible either. They're just supposed to be faithful to the design, and to me it's probably the weakest part of the figure as far as the presentation is concerned. Although I will give them a little bit of credit to making the actual buckle as well as the belt around his waist kind of its own separate piece, while at the same time being tight enough that it's not super loose amongst any kind of easy touch by handling the figure. So it's cool to see that it kind of gives it a little bit of extra quality by having it be its own piece, so it feels a little bit more premium. That becomes a little bit more apparent when you move the back side of it right here. And also the diaper itself kind of flushes with the figure in a way that doesn't feel so stand out. It doesn't look like it's kind of over large as opposed to the proportions of the figure's actual scale here, so it doesn't look like its own separate piece. It looks like it's part of the pants overall. To me, the standout as far as something that McFarlane was able to really excel in terms of sculpting and detail has to be that jacket. I like how they were able to etch out the little creases of not only the jacket itself, but also the armor padding that he's got going underneath that he more than likely carried on over from his original Arkham Knight armor. But moreover than that, I like how they painted on the little, what's meant to be the original Robin design of the emblem on his chest, not only on the front, but also the back. It's actually one of the ones that I completely forgot Rocksteady also put on their personal design, and it's cool to see that not only did McFarlane replicate that, but they still gave it kind of like that spray can design on top of there, kind of like something that he put together in at the last minute, especially after the events of the ending of Arkham Knight, all things considered. And overall, the creases and the sculpting going alongside the jacket is probably going to be my favorite part of this figure from a design standpoint. It's following suit of a lot of McFarlane's, or frankly a lot of action figures in general. I feel like Marvel Legends is kind of privy to doing this as well, where whenever it's a jacket but they don't want to compromise the articulation, they pretty much turn it into a vest, and that's pretty much what you're dealing with here. The jacket middle vest portion being its own piece, and then the arms pretty much being sculpted as very rubberized plastic as their own individual pieces to make sure that none of the articulation is compromised, and I respect it. And they were able to get an awful lot of the details and those paint applications right that to me really make this figure kind of like its own thing, similar to the way that the DLC was. The only thing that gave me some pause, and rightfully so, especially after handling him for a few hours, is the Red Hood itself. For Red Hood, I know, shocker. This, I think, is going to be the part of the figure that's going to separate and cause an awful lot of debate amongst the community, because even though it looks cool from a presentation standpoint to make sure that it's accurate to that portrayal that Rocksteady made, and it's rubberized so that there's some form of way of kind of movement and flexibility to the overall figure portion of this entire ordeal, it's going to be causing some issues as far as not only posability, but articulation. And this is a perfect segue into such articulation, because as cool as Red Hood can look like here in neutral positions, there was something that made me scared that was going to be the only positions I was going to be able to put him in, since the hood itself is completely attached to the vest that I just mentioned. I kind of wish that the hood was removable in some way, and I know that that would have been some extra research and development. They would have probably asked for some extra time for this figure to be put in R&D, and as such, McFarlane wanted to make sure that this thing released as a companion piece to Scarecrow, and that wasn't a viable option. I understand that business is business, but on the one hand, I really wish that there would have been a way to have had this be its own separate piece that could clip on or be maneuverable, maybe like a cloth piece. We've seen McFarlane do cloth pieces before, especially with certain Batman that had cloth capes, and I know that, again, it's another thing that's kind of debated amongst the community. Some people like him, some people downright hate him. I think that Red Hood could have been a potential exception here, because you could have moved and be able to kind of do something articulated with the hood itself, because even though it's sculpted very well and painted pretty decently, though I would have appreciated a slightly darker shade of red on the hood itself, it's attached, and because it's attached, we cannot see the full extent of how awesomely sculpted the actual Red Hood helmet is underneath there. From what I can see here on the front, it's sculpted really well with a nice little matte finish to the paint, as well as the circular metal discs that are on the side that are intended for him to be able to breathe through. It looks great. It genuinely looks awesome. I just know that via the Red Hood DLC, as well as the context behind his armor in the Arkham Knight game, there should be some added detail from behind the helmet, and I would have loved to have seen that. So one can only ponder, is there actual detail going on behind the head? I know it's a very minor thing that I'm going on a tangent for, but it's a legitimate concern I have as both a collector and a reviewer. And one could also argue that, more importantly, it compromises the articulation for the head. So you're not really able to do a full 360, let alone a full 180, because as you see right here, the slight etching that I'm able to kind of do via the mouth portion of the front of the head here, with my finger as much as I can get inside of the hood, is pretty much the only kind of mobility you get with the head for Red Hood. Otherwise, no, like there's nothing there, not even tilting upwards or downwards. By technicality, I have to say, this is probably the worst head articulation on a McFarlane ever, that I've ever covered on a figure, which is a shame because the figure itself so far is doing a pretty bang up job of giving us a pretty cool looking Red Hood. Thankfully, as we move on, the vest design of the jacket does a fair job of being able to give us the natural articulation that we're come to expect from McFarlane on these figures. You're able to move the arms all the way around vertically, as well as properly extend them towards the side like so, with very smooth joints at the top of the arm that don't necessarily have too much swiveling going alongside on the inwards portion, but you do have a decent cut on the bicep that's completely horizontal and it's blended into the jacket, so they did a pretty bang-up job of being able to blend that in and make it almost invisible. Though I will admit, the joints around the biceps feel just a little bit on the frail side. Every time I either turn them or kind of give them a little bit of force, they feel just a little finicky. At least they do on my particular Red Hood. Two joints at the elbow that are fully able to bend all the way upwards, as well as an interesting wrist joint that I'll get into a little bit more broader detail later, but it's able to allow the wrist to fully rotate 360 degrees, as well as being able to pivot inwards and outwards, but in a unique way that I'll showcase more a little later. We then get torso joints that has a complete vertical cut on the middle portion here of the armor, with the flatted out chest right here. He's probably got the flattest chest of any of the Bat family, so to speak, but you are able to rotate it left and right, not all the way across due to the way that the vest is designed, but there's a little bit of crunching inwards and outwards, as well as slightly side to side. Not the most broadest way to have the oblique kind of crunch into itself that I've seen from McFarlane, but he does have a waist cut that allows it to pretty much rotate 360 degrees. But because of how much is going alongside right here with the jacket and the belt itself, I'm not going to really risk that too much. But the mobility is found there. We pretty much follow very standardly amongst the articulation on the legs. The top leg joints are able to flex all the way forwards about that much, as well as that far back. And then, of course, both are able to properly extend as much as the pieces around the holsters that are holding the clips, the magazine clips on the side, and the jacket itself can allow. Behind the knee guards, you do have two joints that are able to allow the leg to fully bend all the way upwards. And then we get down to the ankles, where we sadly have the traditional ball joints and not so much the joints, the vertical, much more cylindrical looking design of the joints there that I really loved from most recent reviews that I've been doing. Sadly, those are missing here, and they're replaced with the traditional and pretty, generic ball joints, but they do get the job done of being able to have the shoe slightly pivot downwards a couple of notches and then upwards just a couple more tabs right there, so it's a little ratchetedy, as well as allowing it the foot to rotate all the way across 360 degrees. And then of course the toesies are probably some of the smaller ones I've seen in recent memory, but they are able to bend all the way out up on both feet. Now, unlike the companion piece Scarecrow, he did come with a good chunk of accessories. However, the mentioning of accessories for virtually any Red Hood figure nowadays raises some eyebrows amongst collectors, because as we all know, there's this weird thing with Warner Brothers where certain characters that McFarlane puts out cannot have particular accessories. So what McFarlane decided to do is throw in two particular accessories that I personally just do not understand, even for the context of Red Hood inside of this specific Arkham Knight video game. Maybe I need to replay the game itself or the DLC, but there's just something about the way that the game was going for a much more grounded approach that pretty much renders these accessories just utterly ridiculous. First, we have this flaming thing. I don't know what to really call it, but it's pretty much meant to be an effect with a form of hook or grasp designed here at the end of it. And what it's pretty much meant to be, you're supposed to take it and put it inside of one of his lower legs. What I like to do, since it's rather narrow and his shins turn out to be a little bit on the thicker side due to the way that this guard is designed, I like to kind of slip it into the shoe and then kind of just ride it up into the leg itself, trying my best to not break it whatsoever. But pretty much this is how it's supposed to be via some of the pictures and promo shots that I've seen, and I just don't get it, because from what I remember playing that DLC, again, my mind might just be a little bit sketchy. We might be in need of a replay through. Who knows? Maybe I'll do one live on stream here on the YouTube channel. But from what I remember, I don't remember this effect ever playing a part during his gameplay, whether it be combat or traversal. I just don't see it. Maybe Gotham Knights, since he's got that fancy kind of hovering effect that he's got going on via his resurrection, but they didn't really go in that full direction behind his mythos in Arkham Knight. Maybe if it had been Arkham City, since that includes the involvement of Ra's al Ghul and Talia al Ghul and the Lazarus Pit and whatnot, but you know, they get a little murky when it comes to the mythology when we jump from games like Arkham Asylum and City on over to Knight, and therefore it makes things like this kind of questionable, accessories like this, just a little bit on the questionable side. And it gets even worse because that's not the only little red fire effect that they threw in with Red Hood. They also gave him this kind of whirly effect. It almost looks like an energy ball, and as you can see, it's got kind of like a cyclonic looking hooks on the back, and what it's meant to be, it's meant to go into one of his fisted hands. It's supposed to wrap itself around the hand, so all you really have to do is just kind of give it the effect and screw it onto one of his hands, have him hold it, and that's pretty much what that is. I know now, looking face forward into the figure, what it's meant to be, it's supposed to kind of represent a muzzle effect, considering that the actual accessory in question cannot really be thrown in with the figure. So it's meant to kind of emulate the look like he is. Let's stop beating around the bush. He's supposed to be shooting his guns. He is meant to have his trademark double pistols, but because McFarlane is not able to directly throw them in with the figure, he has to come with this light effect amongst the hand. And, well, at least it's better than the shooting finger guns, so to speak. But fret not, ladies and gentlemen, because McFarlane knew ahead of time how ridiculous these little effect accessories would have been. And they decided to throw in something, a form of loophole, you could say, to not only please the fans, please the collectors, but also kind of throw in a little bit of a jab on over to Warner Brothers. So McFarlane, the little devious one over there, Todd himself, went ahead and threw in an extra pair of what seemed to be gun-holding hands. That swarmy son of a bitch. I love him, though. I really do love him. Because, I mean, come on. Just the sheer act of throwing these guys in is enough for him to pretty much be indirectly saying, we know that Red Hood needs to have his guns, and we can't do that, but what we can do is throw in hands that look suspiciously like they could be holding pistols in and of themselves. Now, one little criticism that I do have is the way that this pretty much sheds light on the very unique way that the articulation is done this time, because as you can see, this is, in my opinion, the first time that I've seen, well, actually, I think there's other McFarlanes that have done this, but I just can't really think of any at the top of my head right now via my collection or others that are a part of the catalog. What they decided to do with the joints this time is bake the hinge into the bottom portion of the wrist. So when you have the hands separated from the figure, as like you see here, the only real thing that you can do is just kind of press the hinge inwards and outwards to allow the hand to move inwards and outwards. Once it's actually popped into the figure, that's when you then get your full rotation articulation. So it's not via any kind of ball joint, it's just kind of flushed into the figure. This is a much different way to do the articulation that they have done in the past. Unfortunately, because of the way that this entire rod is generated to form the peg that pops into the wrist, I think this is probably one of the most difficult hand accessories to swap between the fisted hands and the open gun hands, as I like to call them. So do be careful when swapping them out, because it's not necessarily a breeze like I have seen with other figures in the past. You actually have to give it a very firm tug, which does kind of bring in some form of risk of potentially breaking some of these joints. So just beware that you need to take an awful lot of caution when swapping these guys out. And I know that I'm definitely going to be wanting to do that when eventually I get to these bad boys. Yes, you best believe that we'll be giving Red Hood here his proper accessories. For posterity, let's go ahead and compare the Red Hood McFarlane with the Arkham Knight McFarlane, also from Batman Arkham Knight. And as you can see, completely different figures, similar to how I said in the Scarecrow review, where you have two different designs that begged two completely different figures. No need to have any kind of repaints or reuses of specific pieces, except for maybe the shin guards, but even they've been slightly overhauled to have a less militarized look. So as you can see right here, this is pretty much what they got going on for as far as McFarlane is concerned. And it's cool to see that they did take a different approach. It's supposed to kind of resemble his transformation from being a full-on villain to more of the mythological anti-hero that he's become amongst Gotham City. And overall, it is a pretty good McFarlane figure. I just feel like there's too many compromises here for my taste that kind of fell a little bit short. Yes, the accessories are a little bit ridiculous, but it's good to see that this was kind of out of Todd's hands, mainly illustrated by the fact that he threw in those gun-holding hands, so that could be kind of pushed on over to the side. What I personally cannot kind of detach from my criticism of the figure is that actual red hood. That red hood kind of bolsters here, because I wish it was done something about it, whether it be removable or made out of cloth, so we can get some proper head articulation, because it kind of kills it for me that pretty much stays stagnant, and as such it kind of turns him into a little bit of a standard posing figure as opposed to having any kind of action fluidity built into him the way that maybe even Arkham Knight is capable of doing. And because of that, I'm going to give the Arkham Knight Red Hood a 7 out of 10. It's still a pretty good quality figure. I just think that there were avenues of it that could have been made a little better to have had a much more seminal Red Hood that is probably one of the best kind of character portrayals out of Arkham Knight, considering the lackluster twist behind his involvement in the story and what that led to in the actual original Rocksteady video game. However, not a bad outing of a figure, and I'm pretty sure that adding particular accessories from the munitions pack, as well as maybe 1 or 2 decent little paint jobs from either a custom job done by myself or some other person, could probably elevate this figure to what it really needed to be. So if you happen to be one of those customizers, or you want to get your own Red Hood figure as well as the Arkham Knight figure, then be sure to use the links in the description that take you on over to Big Bad Toy Store. They do help out the channel in the process, but you can both bring these figures home now. They're ready to ship. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up. If not, hit the thumbs down. Comment below what you guys think of the Red Hood, as well as the Scarecrow and most recent Arkham Knight and Arkham City figures. Do you think that McFarlane is doing an amazing job, and what do you guys want them to see be done next? Whether it be Arkham Origins, I know Nolan trilogy is probably something that they got looking forward to in the spring of 2023. Let me know in the comments below, and as always guys, stay humble. I'll see you later.